Cheap versus expensive, lighters.
For our cheap option, we have a normal gas lighter. And for our expensive option, we have an electric plasma lighter. For our first test, we put the tips of each lighters right on a fuse to see which one would light the fuse the fastest. And you can see the generic lighter took a little longer to light the fuse. Then we tried the same test, but this time on a paper towel. And for this test, the cheap lighter did light it up a little faster. So overall, here's my conclusion. The cheap lighter is going to be able to handle 99% of all tasks that you would need a lighter like this for. And the only real benefit to the expensive lighter is that it is windproof and it is a rechargeable lighter and won't run out of gas. So if you think it's worth it to spend an extra few dollars for the expensive lighter, then it's up to personal preference.
And cheap wins!
The winter season's around the corner and you look like you could probably use a high quality pair of winter gloves. And luckily for you, today we're testing cheap versus expensive winter gloves. So our cheap option on the left is going to run you around $15, while the expensive option on the right is going to run you a whopping 60 bucks. The first thing we tested was the mobility and the flexibility of these gloves while worn. They both felt pretty similar, but because of the second layer added onto the expensive glove, it did make the flexibility go down a little bit. Then we moved on to see how well the gloves could really withstand some extreme low temperatures. You honestly couldn't really feel much through either of the gloves, but because of the expensive having that extra layer, it is going to keep your hand a little warmer in general. Then we tested how the fabrics would react under some water. They both work just fine, but obviously the expensive leather is going to make it a lot easier to deflect the water.
And expensive wins!
Are you an avid gamer always looking to up your skill level when playing video games? If so, then this video is for you, because today, we're testing cheap versus expensive gaming mice. First, we looked at all the different features on the mice. Right off the bat, the biggest difference I realized was the cables. The cheap mouse had a nice braided cable, while the expensive mouse just had a rubber cable. The only other difference is that the cheap mouse has 4 programmable buttons, while the expensive mouse only has 2. In hand, both mice felt pretty good, but the expensive mouse just felt slightly more ergonomic. Now, let's check the weight of each mouse. So the cheap mouse weighed in at 105 grams, while the expensive mouse weighed in at 100 grams flat, which is honestly not much of a noticeable difference. Now we're moving on to the sensor test. We tested out each of the mice on a variety of different surfaces to see how well the sensors really react. We used a wooden surface, a cement surface, and a surface made out of a bunch of fur. Overall, I would say that the sensor on the expensive mouse was able to react a lot more precise on each of the surfaces. And lastly, we did a quick drop test to see the durability of each of the mice. The cheap mouse did have a piece completely fly off, but it was able to snap back into place, while the expensive handled the impact like a champ.
And expensive wins!
If you're looking for the best blender for your kitchen, look no further, because today, we're testing cheap versus expensive blenders. Right off the bat, you can see the cheap blender has 4 blades while the expensive has 6. Now to see how well those blades really work. We grabbed an assortment of fruits to create the best fruit smoothie we could. Bananas, strawberries, apples, and more. We tossed in our ice and began blending. After about 20 seconds, it was time to check the consistency. Only going based off appearance, both blenders did a very good job. So finally, we had to move on to the taste test. So after trying both smoothies, here's what we came up with. The consistencies for both smoothies were the same, aside from one thing. The cheap blender wasn't able to blend the apples as well as the expensive.
An expensive one! Cheap versus expensive, highlighters.
So to test the highlighters, we used them on a couple different types of materials to see how well they could work. First, we used them on a page of a book. We started with the cheap highlighter, and now we're using the expensive highlighter. Just judging based off the looks, I would say that the expensive highlighter has a much more appealing look to it. But off performance, I would say both highlighters work pretty much identically. Now for the same test, but different colors. I would say that the main difference based off how the highlighters work is just the color. The expensive highlighter seems to have a more pastel tone of color versus the cheap having a very vibrant color. And here's what the highlighters look like on a magazine. Same results. And here's a quick test to see how the highlighters will bleed through a normal piece of paper. Overall, I would say it's not worth spending more money on an expensive highlighter, so cheap wins.